Karen thought she could easily kick a black boy out of the first-class cabin with just a few carefully chosen words, until the boy calmly pulled out his phone, turned the screen toward her, and revealed a picture of him standing next to his father, the flight's captain. Karen walked through Dallas-Fort Worth Airport with pride, her designer suitcase gliding smoothly across the floor as if she were walking down a rose-covered path. Her steps were light, but her gaze was sharp, scanning those around her with an air of haughty confidence. She was used to flying first class, a place she believed was reserved for those of the proper status. In Karen's mind, first class wasn't just a section on a plane. It was a statement of social standing. It was the world of businessmen, politicians, successful people who could easily spend thousands of dollars just to ensure a comfortable flight. Free champagne, gourmet meals, polite and intellectual conversations between those who were just like her, people who belonged here. Karen was too accustomed to the feeling of priority. She'd never had to wait at the check-in counter. Her luggage was always among the first to come out on the conveyor belt. And above all, she never had to endure inconvenience. However, as soon as Karen reached her seat, everything changed. She froze. The seat next to hers was occupied, and it wasn't by a middle-aged businessman in an expensive suit as she had expected. Sitting there, relaxed and completely unaware of her presence, was a black boy around 13 years old. Karen blinked, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. The boy wore a white hoodie, neat jeans, and clean sneakers. He didn't look sloppy, but he certainly didn't look like he belonged here. He held a thick book in his hands, engrossed in reading, completely ignoring everything around him. Karen felt a wave of discomfort rise in her chest. She waited for some sort of reaction from the boy, perhaps some embarrassment, an apologetic glance for sitting in the wrong seat, or at least some awareness of her presence. But no, the boy didn't look up, didn't blink, didn't react in any way. This only made Karen more furious. Her hand tightened around her handbag strap. Without a word, she dropped her bag onto the seat with just enough force to make a loud noise, as if issuing a silent warning. But instead of flinching or looking awkward, the boy continued reading, seemingly oblivious to her presence. Karen felt her face flush with anger. A black child? In first class? She took a deep breath, feeling an inexplicable sense of dissatisfaction. In Karen's mind, this was not what should be in first class. She could not accept this. Karen was momentarily stunned, the discomfort gradually seeping into every corner of her thoughts. She had expected a reaction from the boy, perhaps confusion, an explanation, or even an apologetic glance, as if he had mistakenly sat in the wrong seat. But no, the boy simply responded with one word, short and almost indifferent. Yes. There was no hint of bewilderment or hesitation, no sign that he was embarrassed or waiting for someone to rescue him from this situation. His calm confidence made Karen feel that something was very off. She gripped the armrest tightly, a sudden surge of unjustified frustration rising within her. The boy was not afraid. He didn't seem small or shy, nothing like what she had expected from a child when questioned by an adult. More importantly, he wasn't reacting in the way she had hoped. Karen stared at the boy, but he'd already returned to his book, as if the conversation had never happened. That made her feel ignored, something she was not used to enduring. Her irritation grew. Karen shifted, deliberately rearranging her belongings noisily, slowly but forcefully zipping her bag, placing her water bottle down with a sharp clink, even lifting her skirt just slightly to create a movement designed to get his attention. But he remained still, his eyes fixed on the page in front of him, not even glancing at her once. This only made Karen more annoyed. The boy's silence felt like a form of contempt. She took a deep breath, leaned toward the boy, her voice tinged with doubt but still attempting to sound polite. "Are you sure you're sitting in the right seat?" The boy looked up from his book, meeting her gaze. His eyes showed no sign of confusion or fear, only calmness, as if her question was insignificant. "Yes." Just one word, no elaboration, no explanation, no hint of emotion. Karen bit her lip, feeling challenged by the sheer composure. She couldn't believe that a child could sit there so composed. To Karen, the world operated by an unspoken rule. Those in first class had to look like they belonged there, and clearly, in her eyes, this boy did not fit. She glanced around, hoping someone, maybe a flight attendant or another passenger, had noticed this oddity and would take action. But everyone was preoccupied with their own affairs. Then she saw Emily, the head flight attendant, standing a few rows ahead, talking to another passenger. Karen immediately raised her hand, calling her over. Emily, who was used to passengers with special needs, quickly approached with a professional smile. "Hello? Is there something I can assist you with?" Karen straightened up, adjusting her tone to seem friendly, though her discomfort was clear in her eyes. "I think there's been a mistake here." Emily tilted her head slightly. "What kind of mistake?" Karen glanced at the boy, then turned back to Emily with a smile full of implications. "I don't think this boy is sitting in the right seat." She said it in a soft tone, but with enough insinuation to suggest she was just trying to help the flight attendant fix a minor mistake. She was certain that Emily would immediately check the ticket and spot the error. Then the boy would be asked to leave, restoring the peace and order that first class was meant to have. But Karen didn't know that things were about to take an unexpected turn. Emily approached with a professional smile, her eyes bright with confidence, exuding the calm demeanor of a seasoned flight attendant. She had been in this job long enough to understand that sometimes first-class passengers could be overly demanding, and when a middle-aged woman wearing a designer dress and sparkling jewelry waved her over impatiently, Emily knew she was about to handle a special request. Karen looked up when she saw Emily approaching, her lips curling into a stiff smile. It wasn't a genuine smile, but the kind of smile people like her wear when they believe they're right and expect validation from others. She let out a soft, almost forced laugh, the tone somewhat awkward, yet laced with implication. "Oh, I think there's been a little mix-up," she said in a saccharine tone, as if she were merely trying to help someone fix a minor mistake. "I'm not sure if this boy is sitting in the right seat." Emily furrowed her brow slightly, but maintained her polite composure. She glanced at the boy, her gaze only briefly passing over him before returning her focus to Karen. The boy remained in place, showing no sign of concern about the situation unfolding around him. He didn't blink, nor did he appear flustered or alarmed. If another child were in this situation, they might scramble to pull out their ticket or at least look to Emily for confirmation, but not this boy. He simply turned a page in his book, continuing to read as if no one had called his name. Karen cast a quick glance at the boy before turning back to Emily, hoping the flight attendant would recognize that something was wrong and act immediately. But instead, Emily remained calm, slipping her hand into her jacket pocket and pulling out a tablet. "I'll double-check right away, ma'am." Karen gave a small nod, satisfied. As Emily swiped across the screen, Karen looked around the first-class cabin, seemingly searching for agreement from the other passengers. She was sure someone else would notice something was off, just like she did. But instead of nods of agreement, she only received curious or indifferent glances. A middle-aged man in a suit across the aisle glanced over but said nothing, merely lifting his newspaper. A young woman a few rows behind briefly looked at her phone screen and quickly texted, appearing uninterested. Karen's frustration grew. Didn't they see it? A black child, alone, sitting in first class, there was clearly something wrong. She tightened her grip on her purse strap, her patience wearing thin as Emily continued to check the list. Could this really be taking so long? Finally, after a few seconds, Emily looked up, her gaze unwavering. "The child is sitting in his assigned seat, ma'am. He has a first-class ticket." Karen felt a wave of irritation rise within her. She could hardly believe her ears. "Oh, how strange," she said, her lips curling in a forced smile. Her tone was more awkward than before. She had been certain something was wrong, that if she just called the flight attendant over, this mistake would be immediately clarified, but instead of the expected result, she was turned down. Karen glanced at the boy again. He didn't look at her, nor did he show any sign of being aware of the discussion about his seat. He simply flipped another page in his book, as if Emily's confirmation had never been an issue. The boy's calmness unsettled Karen, making her feel that something was very wrong. Somehow, the boy didn't seem grateful for the confirmation of his right to sit there. There was no shy glance, no awkward smile, not even a simple thank you directed at Emily. It was as though his presence here was completely natural. Karen couldn't accept that. She still believed something was off. And then a thought flashed through her mind. Another way to flip the situation. She took a deep breath, shifting tactics. "So, where are your parents?" This time, her voice was softer, laced with fake friendliness, as if she were genuinely concerned about the boy's safety. She believed the child couldn't possibly be here alone. Someone had to be responsible for his presence. If his parents weren't here, it would only make the situation more suspicious. Emily furrowed her brow slightly, but before she could respond, the boy smiled faintly. He looked directly at Karen, no longer indifferent, but with a gaze full of confidence that seemed completely out of place for a child being questioned by an adult. Then he turned back to his book, as if Karen's question didn't even warrant an answer. He didn't need to explain himself. The boy's silence wasn't avoidance, it was a statement of certainty. Karen opened her mouth to say something, but in that moment, she realized that the boy had done the unthinkable in her eyes. He had refused to be controlled by her, and that drove her mad. Karen felt a rush of heat rising in her chest. She couldn't believe she had just been blatantly ignored by a child right in front of everyone. Throughout her life, she had been far too accustomed to being listened to, respected, and immediately accommodated. Yet, in just a few minutes, a 13-year-old boy had embarrassed her without saying a word. She couldn't accept this. Karen took a deep breath, trying to control her anger. She needed a different strategy. If the direct approach wasn't working, she would resort to a softer, yet still calculated approach. Without hesitation, she pressed the call button again, even though Emily had just left not long ago. At the front of the first-class cabin, Emily heard the bell and turned back. This time, her face no longer held the same patient expression from earlier. Although she was used to dealing with unpleasant requests from passengers, Karen was beginning to cross the line from a typical complaint. Still, Emily maintained her professional demeanor, her voice calm but slightly slower this time. "Is there anything else I can assist you with, ma'am?" Karen leaned slightly forward towards Emily, lowering her voice but still loud enough for the surrounding passengers to hear. I don't want to cause trouble," she began, intentionally emphasizing her tone as though she were a very polite and considerate person. "But I'm really not feeling comfortable. Is there any way I could change my seat?" Emily didn't immediately respond. She briefly glanced over Karen's face, almost as if assessing what she was trying to achieve. Then, she replied gently, her voice still professional, but with more certainty. Today's flight is fully booked, ma'am. There are no empty seats in first class. This answer didn't surprise Karen, but it didn't discourage her either. She had been prepared for this situation. Karen slowly raised an eyebrow, as if she had just come up with a well-meaning idea. "What about economy class?" she suggested. Emily slightly furrowed her brows, not because the question was difficult, but because she was beginning to realize Karen was trying to manipulate the situation in some way. "There are a few empty seats in economy, but—" Karen didn't let her finish. "Perfect. Then just move this boy to economy." The moment those words left her mouth, the atmosphere in the first-class cabin suddenly shifted. Soft murmurs started to spread among the passengers around them. Some turned their heads to look at Karen, others glanced at the boy, as if waiting to see how he would react. A few other passengers, though silent, began to pay attention. A young woman sitting 2 rows away gently raised her phone, pretending to scroll through the news, but in reality she was recording the entire situation. Emily blinked, but quickly regained her composure. She stared at Karen, her gaze no longer holding any patience. Instead, it was now filled with an unshakable determination. Then, slowly but firmly, she spoke clearly, word by word. "No, ma'am, that will not happen." Karen was stunned. She couldn't believe her ears. "What do you mean by that?" Her voice rose slightly, a mix of irritation, shock, and above all, fear, as though she had just realized this situation was slipping out of her control. Emily didn't change her expression. She remained calm, but now there was no room for negotiation. "What I mean, ma'am, is that this boy has a first-class ticket just like you. I cannot and will not ask him to move to economy." The first-class cabin fell into a heavy silence. Just moments ago it had been a peaceful place where well-mannered businessmen whispered about work, where the wealthy sipped champagne, and enjoyed the luxury of service. But now, all attention was focused on the row where Karen was sitting. An older man, wearing reading glasses and a luxurious gray suit, slowly set his newspaper down and silently looked at Karen over the rim of his glasses. Another man, sitting across the cabin, let out a small chuckle. A whisper echoed from somewhere behind. Did she really just say that? Karen felt it all. She felt the eyes on her. She felt the phones being raised discreetly. She felt the entire cabin's atmosphere turning against her, and she couldn't stand it. She took a deep breath, trying to maintain her composure. "I don't think you understand me," Karen said, her voice softer now, but clearly suppressing a growing anger. "I'm just saying, if there's a seat available in economy, and if I'm uncomfortable sitting here, then clearly the boy could be the one to move. I don't think that's an unreasonable request." Emily remained still. She just stared at Karen, unwavering, without a hint of hesitation or doubt. "I understand your point, and my answer is still no." This time, Emily's voice carried no softness. It was firm, with absolute certainty. Karen felt her heart racing. She was used to having her requests accepted, used to having others comply with her wishes. But now, in front of her was a flight attendant who dared to say no to her, without fear, without hesitation, and that made her feel as if she were losing control. But Karen was not the type of person to give up easily. If being friendly didn't work, if compromising didn't work, then she would need another strategy. She would need to play her power card, and she knew exactly how to do it. She took a deep breath, then gently, but with full calculation, played her most dangerous card. "I don't feel safe." The atmosphere in the first-class cabin became thick as soon as those words left Karen's mouth. "I don't feel safe." A moment of silence stretched on. It wasn't the comfortable silence of passengers engrossed in their work or relaxing before a long flight, but a heavy silence filled with tension and surprise. Emily stood there, her eyes glinting with caution, but her face remained composed, professionally calm. A few passengers in front shifted slightly backward, as if they'd just heard something absurd yet all too familiar. A middle-aged man in a suit, sitting not far away, shook his head gently, curling his lips in a slight disapproving smile. "Does she really think she can get away with that?" he said softly, but loud enough for those around him to hear. In another row, a man wearing Bluetooth headphones clicked his tongue, casting a weary glance at Karen, as though he had witnessed too many similar incidents before. Whispers began to ripple through the cabin. The passengers were beginning to realize what was happening, but Karen paid no attention to any of it. She focused solely on Emily and her reaction, because in Karen's mind she was sure this would work. Karen was playing a dangerous game. She knew that vague accusations like this were enough to put someone on the defensive. She had seen situations before where simply stating that they didn't feel safe made everything shift. The passenger would be questioned. Security would be called. The accused would often bear the brunt of the consequences. She was used to this, and she believed this time would be no different, because she was a powerful white woman, and the boy was a black child. In Karen's mind, things should unfold as follows. Emily would immediately change her attitude, become tense, maybe call someone in a higher position, a senior flight attendant or even the captain. Maybe they would ask the boy to step down for a check, or, if the situation seemed serious enough, they would force him off the plane. That was how Karen had seen the world operate all her life. But this time, she was wrong. Emily didn't react as Karen expected. She stood there, but instead of hurrying or panicking, she tilted her head slightly, her eyes growing sharper. "I'm sorry. Could you clarify?" Emily's voice was no longer soft as before. It was firm, laced with caution. Karen blinked, not used to this kind of response. She should have heard something like, "I'm so sorry. Let me handle it right away," or, "We'll check on that immediately." But no, Emily was asking her to clarify. This wasn't what Karen had expected. The eyes in the cabin were all on Karen. From the rows in front and behind, passengers were no longer just listening. They were staring at her. She could feel the atmosphere shift around her. Earlier, when she had spoken to Emily, people simply ignored it, treating it like a normal complaint from a difficult passenger. But now, they understood what was going on. They had seen stories like this on the news, read about instances where a white person made a baseless accusation against a person of color, and that had led to disastrous consequences for the accused. They realized this wasn't just a seating issue. They saw that Karen wasn't truly scared. She was trying to manipulate the situation to get what she wanted. Karen began to feel her control slipping away. She couldn't let that happen. She blinked, took a deep breath, and tried to regain the upper hand. "I'm not saying I feel threatened," she corrected. "I just don't feel comfortable sitting here." But this time, no one believed her. A man sitting across from her shook his head, crossed his arms, and pressed his lips together as if trying to suppress a curse. A woman behind her chuckled softly, shaking her head in disappointment. The whispers grew louder. A young passenger seated 3 rows away quietly raised his phone and began recording. Karen felt all of it. She could feel the shame crashing over her. But instead of accepting that she was losing, she decided to escalate the issue. She took a deep breath, then turned to look at Emily, her eyes full of meaning. "I think I need to speak to the captain." She was trying to force the situation further. A faint hiss echoed through the cabin. A man behind her scoffed. Typical Karen. But Karen didn't care about them. She believed that if she could speak to someone higher up, she could make everything go her way. She believed she could still regain control. She believed that somehow the boy could still be forced off. But this time, she had misjudged the situation. Because this time, she wasn't just facing a flight attendant. She was facing an entire first-class cabin full of witnesses, and they were all looking at her. What she didn't know was that, across the cabin, someone was uploading the video to social media. In just a few minutes, the world would know exactly what was happening on this flight, and this time, no one could save her from the consequences. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin thickened immediately after Karen's words. Some passengers leaned forward, trying to hear better. A few others whispered to each other, their faces a mix of shock and discomfort. Emily, still standing straight, maintained her calm demeanor, but her eyes sharpened, as if evaluating every single word that Karen had just uttered. She knew exactly what this woman was trying to do. The boy, who had remained silent until now, suddenly raised an eyebrow, as if that one comment had finally piqued his interest. No one could have guessed that Karen had just made the biggest mistake of her life. The boy took action. Unhurried, unfazed, he gently closed his book, placed it on the fold-down tray in front of him, and slowly pulled his phone out of his hoodie pocket. Karen stared, her heart racing faster, partly from tension, partly from confusion as she couldn't understand what was happening. The boy opened his phone, scrolled through a few pictures, and then stopped on one in particular. Calmly, he raised the screen, not just towards Emily but also for anyone recording to see clearly. On the phone screen, a photo appeared. The boy, standing next to a man in a pilot's uniform, holding a hat, with a confident smile beside him. The boy looked up, his eyes bright, his lips curling into a mischievous but polite smile. "My dad is the captain of this flight." The room seemed to freeze. In just a second, the entire first-class cabin sank into an absolute silence. A passenger sitting behind gasped, clearly not expecting this turn of events. An older man sitting nearby chuckled softly, shaking his head as if witnessing a perfect reversal. A few people clapped lightly, unable to contain their delight at this spectacular twist. Emily, though the calmest person on the plane, couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. She didn't say anything, but her eyes gleamed with a clear understanding. It was all over for Karen. And in the end, Karen was frozen. Karen lost control. Throughout her life, Karen had been accustomed to power, to having others fulfill her every demand without question or debate. But now, in this moment, everything she had relied on had been shattered in just a few seconds. She felt as though she had been ripped from her position. All her plans, all her calculations collapsed right before her eyes. No one on this plane would stand by her anymore. But what made her feel most helpless was the boy's gaze. It wasn't fear, it wasn't anger, it wasn't hatred, it was utter calmness, a calmness full of power. The boy didn't need to raise his voice, didn't need to react angrily, didn't need to defend himself. Just one picture, one statement, and he had regained all his power. And now, Karen was the one in the weak position. The boy tilted his head slightly, staring directly into Karen's eyes, his voice unchanged, but carrying more significance than ever before. "Do you still want me to move to economy class?" Karen couldn't speak. 1 second passed, then 2. Karen tried to open her mouth, but no words escaped her throat. For the first time in her life, she felt completely powerless. She looked around, hoping for a sympathetic glance, someone to stand by her side, but there was no one. No one in first class was willing to help her. On the contrary, they were looking at her as though she were a joke. A young man sitting on the other side, who had been quietly observing the situation, now pulled out his phone and started recording. A middle-aged woman, likely a businesswoman, looked at Karen with disdain, as if she couldn't believe that an educated person would behave so uncontrollably and with such prejudice. Meanwhile, the boy remained seated, waiting. No more words were needed. It was unnecessary now. Karen knew she had lost, and that hurt more than anything else, the point of no return. Karen wanted to say something, to salvage the situation, but it was too late. Because right now, on social media, a video of her entire ordeal was being uploaded, and within less than 10 minutes it would begin to spread at lightning speed. Karen's story was officially over, but her nightmare was just beginning. Karen sat down on the seat, her breath coming in quick gasps, her chest rising and falling in a desperate attempt to control the fury and humiliation surging through her body. Never before had she felt so utterly powerless. She was used to controlling others, used to giving orders and having them obeyed immediately, accustomed to submission without any argument. Yet today, in just a few short minutes, everything she had ever believed in had been ruthlessly overturned. The air in the first-class cabin became thick, as if a storm had just passed through. But instead of the usual chaos that came with any kind of incident on a plane, all Karen could feel was a suffocating silence. The eyes remained fixed on her, no longer filled with mere curiosity but now carrying a clear sense of judgment. No one was on her side, no one spoke in her defense, and no one seemed interested in salvaging the situation for her. A middle-aged man suddenly burst into laughter, his tone dripping with sarcasm, as though this whole scenario was nothing more than a tragic comedy reaching its peak. "So, this kid has more of a right to be here than you." Several other passengers chuckled along with him, some even clapping, not for the humor, but because they had just witnessed a spectacular twist. A young woman raised her phone, pointing the lens directly at Karen, not even attempting to hide her intention to capture this moment, as if she knew this would be a viral video on social media. Karen could feel it all, but there was nothing she could do. She wanted to shout in protest, to say that this was completely unfair, to find a way to turn the situation around. But in this moment, all words seemed meaningless. She had lost her power, lost her position, lost every ounce of control she had once held so firmly in her hands. And more than anything, she knew that anything she said at this point would only make things worse. Emily stood in front of her, no longer the patient woman she had been earlier, but now exuding an unshakable firmness. "You have two choices. Either you sit quietly or you leave the plane immediately." Her voice offered no room for negotiation or compromise, no patience for explanation or persuasion. It was a command, and Karen knew she could no longer fight back. Her heart pounded. Her breath became heavier. Forced to leave the plane? Impossible. She couldn't bear the humiliation of standing up and walking out of the first-class cabin while everyone here looked at her with disdain. If she left the plane, it would be an admission of failure, an acknowledgement that the boy had won, an admission that she had truly been wrong. But staying seated wasn't easy either. She knew that even if she said nothing more, the other passengers wouldn't let her off the hook. They would keep filming, keep discussing, keep posting on social media, and when the plane landed, everything would explode in ways she couldn't possibly predict. But right now, she had no choice but to sit still, biting her lip so hard it felt like it would bleed, gripping the armrest so tightly that her fingers turned white from the pressure. She said nothing, didn't resist, but everyone could see the failure written all over her face. Meanwhile, the boy remained seated, unchanged, unmoved. He wasn't gloating, wasn't mocking, wasn't acting triumphant. He simply turned back to his book, flipping a page, continuing to read as if the entire confrontation had never happened, as if Karen's presence wasn't even significant enough to warrant his attention. And that drove Karen insane more than anything else. She wanted him to be flustered, to apologize, to feel guilty for being here. But no, he did nothing. He didn't need to do anything. He simply existed, and that was enough to strip her of everything. But Karen still didn't know that her nightmare was far from over. For across the aisle, the young woman filming had finished uploading the video. It wasn't just a simple clip. It came with a title powerful enough to make anyone click on it. A white woman tries to kick a black boy out of first class and learns the biggest lesson of her life. In just seconds, the views began to rise. In minutes, the comments flooded in. Within an hour, the video would spread uncontrollably. But at this moment, Karen had no idea. She didn't know that when the plane landed, the whole world would know about her, but not in the way she had hoped. She didn't know that her image would become a viral storm on social media, a textbook example of arrogance and racism exposed in the most blatant way. She didn't know that her career, her reputation, and her life would change forever because of one moment of madness on this flight. And by the time she realized it, it would be too late. No one paid attention to Karen anymore, but that was exactly what terrified her. There were no more scrutinizing gazes or direct attention, no more smirking smiles or exasperated headshakes. No one watching her every move as if waiting to see what she would do next. They no longer cared about her, because all of them were focused on the screens of their phones, and that was far more frightening than anything else. Everything was no longer confined to the first-class cabin of this flight. She could feel the truth of it the moment she heard quiet murmurs rising from the rows behind her. Quick glances at phone screens exchanged, followed by astonished or amused looks between passengers. No one spoke aloud, but she could clearly see in their expressions that they were watching something incredibly captivating. Some passengers had stopped whispering and started scoffing, shaking their heads, or texting frantically. No one said anything directly to her, but she didn't need anyone to speak. She already knew exactly what was happening. Her phone buzzed in her purse, not once, but continuously, with one message after another forming an unbroken chain of sound, as if a relentless storm of notifications was pouring down, and she couldn't stop it. A surge of fear crept into the palms of her hands as she reached into her bag, her fingers brushing the smooth back of the phone. She swallowed hard, trying to stay calm, but even just a fleeting glance at the screen was enough to feel like a tidal wave was crashing right in front of her. The first message appeared, frantic, as if the sender was desperate to warn her. "Karen, oh my God, please tell me that's not you." Right beneath it, another message, simple but urgent. "Delete it now, hurry." And just as she blinked, another message popped up with words that made her heart skip a beat, her hand trembling as she gripped the phone tighter. "Do you know, this video has over 100,000 views in just 30 minutes? Karen felt the world spinning around her. Her mind went blank for a moment, as if someone had unplugged her from reality, making everything around her become blurry, distorted, and out of reach. She didn't want to believe it, couldn't believe it, but the panic started to spread from her chest throughout her body, seeping into every cell, tightening around her breath like an invisible rope, slowly pulling her into a bottomless abyss. She opened Twitter, her fingers scrolling on the screen automatically, as if hoping she wouldn't see something too terrible. But as soon as the screen loaded and the first headline appeared, she nearly dropped the phone. Her name was sitting right there on the trending page. Without even clicking on any post, she knew the storm she had created was sweeping through social media with such ferocity that it was unstoppable. She was no longer just a woman on a commercial flight. She had become a name under a microscope, a topic of conversation for millions, transformed into a symbol of arrogance and discrimination, a live lesson on how privilege could be overturned in the blink of an eye. The headline hit her like a thunderclap. Karen tries to kick a black boy off the first-class cabin, but realizes his dad is the captain. Right below was a video of her frowning with fury, Emily looking calm but firm, and the boy smiling slyly as he raised his phone. Her eyes scanned the comments, and immediately she wished she hadn't. How can someone be this shameless? Hope she enjoys being remembered as Number Karen of the Year. Well, guess you can't erase this one, honey. Has anyone figured out who she is yet? She can't escape this one. Every comment was in the same tone: criticism, mockery, statements that she had no chance of saving herself. No one stood by her. No one showed empathy. No one tried to understand. Everyone could clearly see what had happened in the video, and to them, no explanation was needed. Karen wanted to throw her phone away, to escape this reality, but she knew there was no way to run. She no longer controlled her own story. She no longer had the right to decide what would happen next. She was no longer the main character in her own life. She looked up, hoping for a glance of sympathy from those around her, but all she saw were cold faces, people who no longer cared about her. No one needed to say anything because they had seen enough. Everyone had witnessed her true face. Everyone had seen her fail. And the scariest part was she couldn't do anything to change that. As the plane descended, she knew the real storm would hit. She wouldn't be able to hide from this. She wouldn't be able to erase the consequences. And from this moment on, her life would never be the same again. Sweat poured down her forehead, and Karen felt her breath grow heavy and ragged as her eyes continued to scan the list of comments. It was as if each word was transforming into sharp blades, cutting straight into her pride, into the image she had spent a lifetime building. Does she really think she has the right to decide who gets to fly first class? Hope she enjoys being a meme? This is why we need to film racists like this. The comments kept flooding in, with hundreds, then thousands of new people joining the raging storm aimed directly at her. Each sentence felt like a hammer blow, each share like a wave, pushing her further down into the depths of humiliation. She opened Messenger, hoping to find a message from a friend or colleague, someone still on her side, a defense, a word of comfort, a fragile sliver of hope that someone would believe she wasn't the person the internet was portraying her to be. But as the list of messages appeared, all she saw was a string of messages with the same simple content. Karen, what's going on? What the hell were you thinking? I can't believe this. Don't contact me again. She quickly scrolled through each message, her eyes unable to believe what she was reading. Each message was like a door slamming shut in her face. Each friend, each colleague, each relationship she once relied on now turning their back on her, as if she had become a disease no one wanted to be associated with. And then, amid the angry and distancing messages, one name made her heart drop: James Rollins, the chairman of the charity where she had worked for the past 8 years. A man who always spoke about the values of compassion, social justice, and progress. A man she had always thought she could rely on. Karen's hand trembled as she tapped on the message, clinging to a fragile hope that this might be some kind of encouragement, that he would offer her a way out, that he would tell her things could still be salvaged. Karen, we need to talk urgently. Call me back right away. She quickly hit the call button, almost desperate, as if just hearing James's familiar voice could reverse everything, or at least give her a chance to explain. The phone rang 3 times before a click echoed through as James picked up. But instead of the calm and friendly voice she was used to, all she heard was a cold, firm tone, with no trace of hesitation or sympathy. Karen, What do you think you're doing?" She froze, trying to speak, but the excuses she had prepared in her head suddenly felt meaningless. She was no longer in control of the story. "James, I can explain. I didn't mean what everyone thinks I did. This situation has just gone too far." "No, Karen, everyone has already seen it. Do you think I can sit here and pretend this hasn't affected our organization? Do you know how many calls I've received from donors in the last 30 minutes? Her throat tightened. "James, please, just listen to me. I didn't mean it. Don't you get it? No one cares what you meant. All they care about is that video and how you behaved in it. And I can't let that drag our organization down." Karen felt like someone had yanked the chair out from under her. She had known this was coming, but hearing it said in such a decisive tone still left her in disbelief. "James, I've dedicated 8 years to this organization. You can't just... We need you to resign immediately." Her heart stopped. The board met in an emergency session. They agreed that if you don't submit your resignation today, we will be forced to publicly fire you. Her mind spun, as if a storm had just swept everything away, leaving her stranded in an endless void. "James, you can't do this to me. I have no other choice." Karen opened her mouth to say something, but James had already hung up before she could speak another word. She held the phone in her hand, her eyes empty as she stared at the black screen where the call had been abruptly ended. It felt as if the entire world around her was crumbling at her feet, piece by piece, and nothing could save her now. The years spent building her reputation, the events she had attended, the relationships she had cultivated, all suddenly turned to dust because of one moment when she lost control of her anger. She had thought she could manage this situation, that she could turn things around in her favor, but she had overestimated her power and underestimated the impact of a video. She took a deep breath, but the air seemed to drain from her lungs, each breath only adding to the suffocation and panic. This nightmare was no longer just beginning. It had become her reality, and there would be no escape. Karen sat frozen in her chair, the phone still in her hand, but the screen was dark after the call had been abruptly cut off without mercy. Her ears rang, and her breathing grew heavy as if someone had just dealt her a powerful punch to the chest. She had braced herself for a tense conversation, but she never imagined it would end so swiftly, with no space for her to justify herself or find a way out. She had been fired. No warning, no internal investigation, not even a chance to explain. Just a decisive, cold order, offering no room for negotiation. Everything she had, the career, the reputation, the relationships she had carefully built over the years, was wiped away in a single afternoon. Her head spun, and her hand gripped the phone as if it could somehow anchor her to the last remnants of power she had left. But that power was gone now. The board no longer needed her. They didn't need to hear her explain, they didn't need her to clarify, and they didn't care about what had really happened on that flight. They had seen the video, and to them, like to the hundreds of thousands outside, that video was more than enough. Karen felt her breath grow shallow, her chest tightening as her eyes involuntarily glued to the phone screen. A part of her still couldn't accept this reality, still trying to find a reason to believe that it wasn't completely over. She quickly opened Twitter, as if she still had hope of controlling the story somehow, of erasing the trace of the video, or at least finding someone who would stand by her. But as soon as the homepage loaded, a chill ran down her spine. The video views had surpassed 500,000, and were still climbing by the second. She scrolled through the comments, only to feel as though a bucket of ice water had been dumped straight onto her face. This is the nature of people like her, believing they can control everything until the truth is exposed. How ironic that someone in a charity organization behaves this way. Who could ever trust her now? Has anyone figured out her full identity yet? Don't let her get away with this. Each line felt like a knife stabbing deep into her pride. But what terrified her most was the last comment. Has anyone figured out her full identity yet? This was no longer just a social media scandal. This had turned into a hunt, a collective rage heading straight for her with no sign of stopping. Karen hurriedly opened her email, hoping to find a message from the organization's communications team, a plea for help from a colleague, an opportunity to control the damage. But the inbox was filled with cold, threatening subject lines. We regret to inform you, your contract with the organization has been officially terminated. We will hold a press conference tomorrow to clarify the organization's stance on this matter. Karen, I think it's best if you don't contact me again. Everything was collapsing faster than she could have imagined. She wanted to do something, to argue back, to scream that it was all a misunderstanding, but no one was listening. No one wanted to listen anymore. To those outside, she was no longer an individual. She had become a symbol, a textbook example of someone abusing power and privilege in the most shameful way. And what was most terrifying was that she knew there would be no escape. Karen slammed the email app shut and opened Facebook, but that only made her panic more. Her personal page was flooded with comments, relentless criticism, messages from strangers she had never met. Some people even dug through her old posts, scrutinizing every word, looking for any sign that could further solidify her negative image. A post from 5 years ago, where she shared about a charity event, had now become a target. Fake. She never actually cared about social justice. I want to see how long she can keep lying. Some comments were worse, with clear threats, messages full of hate and anger. She was being hunted. And the worst part was that she couldn't control any of it. She felt her breath shortening, her hands trembling as she skimmed through each message, each comment, each post, pushing her deeper into a storm she would never escape. With every passing second, she felt smaller, more insignificant, as though the whole world had turned its back on her without hesitation. She had lost her job, she had lost her reputation, and now she was losing herself. But the nightmare wasn't over, because when the plane landed, everything she had just gone through would be nothing compared to what awaited her ahead. The announcement blared over the loudspeakers, announcing that the flight had landed in Washington, D.C., but Karen no longer felt the usual relief of being back on solid ground. Normally, this would be the moment she would leisurely stand up, adjust her clothes, pull her suitcase down, and walk off the first-class cabin with a confident air, as if she were someone important, someone of status. But this time it felt like the floor beneath her could collapse at any moment. Her hand tightened around the strap of her bag as she glanced out the airplane window, and immediately a chill ran down her spine. At the gate, a group of people were gathered, not passengers waiting to greet their loved ones, but a group of reporters, microphones, cameras, and phones pointed directly at the exit of the flight. They were waiting for her. She almost dropped her phone when she realized this. Everything was happening too fast. She knew the video had gone viral, but she never expected it to explode to the point where reporters were waiting for her at the airport. This was no longer just an online scandal. It was a public debacle, a media story, a hot topic that was big enough to make the major newspapers jump on board. She felt like she was suffocating. Her mind was in chaos, thoughts spinning like a tornado, searching for an escape plan. She could go back to her seat, wait until the very last person leaves, but that wouldn't help. The reporters wouldn't leave. She could pretend to make a phone call, act busy, but no one would buy that act. She could try to find another way out, but she knew there was no escape route. She had to go out there, and she had to face them. Karen took a deep breath, lowered her head, adjusted her hair to cover part of her face, and then stepped off the plane with faster-than-usual strides. She didn't want anyone to recognize her, didn't want to stop, didn't want to give anyone the chance to approach. But just as she stepped through the door, a voice rang out, drawing the attention of everyone around her. "Miss Karen, do you have anything to say about the scandal on the flight?" Immediately, a flurry of cameras snapped. Microphones were thrust toward her, and camera flashes lit up in an instant. The air around her seemed to explode in chaos as reporters jostled for a comment, a picture. A moment they could splash across the front page. Karen was nearly panicking. She could barely breathe. Everything was happening too quickly, too overwhelmingly, too unexpectedly. She hadn't prepared, hadn't scripted a response, hadn't even decided whether she would speak or if she should at all. But they didn't give her time to think. "Do you want to apologize? Do you regret what happened? Do you think you're going to be sued?" Questions came from all directions, sharp gazes from the reporters following her every smallest movement, as if they were predators and she was the prey with nowhere to run. She had to get out of there now. Karen shoved a reporter aside and ran forward at a speed she didn't think she was capable of while wearing high heels. A few people yelled in surprise, but it didn't matter. She had to leave, had to escape immediately, had to find somewhere to hide, to think, to figure out how to turn the situation around before it was too late. She sprinted out of the airport area, breath ragged, eyes darting to find a mode of transportation. The moment she spotted a taxi parked near the exit, she almost jumped into the car, banging on the front window. The driver, a middle-aged man with a look of disbelief, had just opened the door when Karen hopped into the back seat, her voice frantic like an animal cornered. "Drive. Now." The driver blinked, confused by her urgent tone. "Where to?" "I don't care. Just drive. Right now." Right behind her, the airport doors swung open, and several reporters had followed, some even raising their phones to film as they saw her trying to flee. The driver, still not fully understanding what was going on, realized he didn't want to get involved in this chaos. He quickly stepped on the gas, and the taxi sped off, leaving the confused crowd behind. Karen leaned back in the seat, hands covering her face, her breath still uneven, her heart still racing. She closed her eyes, trying to regain control, but all she could see in her mind were the dozens of cameras pointed at her, the hundreds of eyes watching her every move, and the millions of people out there following this story. No longer an isolated incident, no longer something that could be forgotten in a few days. Her story had spiraled out of control. She couldn't stop it, couldn't calm it, couldn't escape it. And when her phone buzzed again, signaling dozens of new messages, Karen realized that this was just the beginning of the real nightmare. Karen collapsed into the taxi seat, her body trembling as though she had just stepped out of a terrifying storm. She tried to steady her breath, but her chest still heaved uncontrollably. Her heart raced, sweat dripping from her forehead despite the air conditioning blasting cold air in the car. Her hand shook as she opened her phone, her fingers quickly scrolling across the screen. She had hoped for some miracle, that the video would be taken down, that the situation would calm down. But the moment she saw the numbers on the screen, a chill ran down her spine. 1.2 million views. It felt like someone had punched her in the stomach. Just hours ago, this was still just a minor incident on a plane. But now, it had become a massive storm, spreading with a speed she couldn't control. It was no longer just a few posts on Twitter or Facebook. Now, every major news outlet had picked it up. CNN, the New York Times, the Washington Post, NBC News, all of them with headlines full of anger and contempt. White woman tries to kick a black boy out of first class, only to be humiliated when she finds out his father is the chief pilot. Privilege and discrimination in the skies. Video sparks outrage on social media. The fall of a woman who once had it all. Her eyes skimmed through article after article. Images of her scowling on the plane. Videos spliced with the moment the boy raised his phone, biting commentary from celebrities. She had become a symbol, but not the kind of symbol she had ever imagined. A symbol of discrimination, of arrogance exposed, of a person stripped of power, helpless against the public's fury. Karen gripped her phone, took a deep breath, and opened her contacts. She needed someone who could help her, someone who could offer advice, a way out. She dialed Amanda's number, her best friend of over a decade, but as soon as the phone rang, it was cut off. A message appeared almost immediately. "Karen, I'm sorry, but I can't be associated with you right now." She blinked, trying to swallow the lump in her throat. She switched to texting Mark, a former colleague. "Mark, please, I need help. Can I talk to you?" 2 minutes passed, 3 minutes, 5 minutes. No reply. When she was nearly ready to give up hope, one final message appeared. "Sorry, Karen, I can't help you." Karen's eyes fixed on the screen, her fingers tightening around the phone until her knuckles turned white. No one was on her side anymore. She leaned back against the seat, feeling the space around her closing in, suffocating her from all sides. She had once had it all: a prestigious job, important social connections, a life that many dreamed of. But in just one afternoon, it had all vanished like a fleeting breeze, leaving behind nothing but the wreckage of her reputation and career. She wanted to believe she could still control the situation, that with a proper explanation, a public statement, everything could be fixed. But she had seen the comments, seen how the world was reacting. No one wanted to hear her anymore. No one cared if she regretted it. They just wanted to see her destroyed. Karen opened Facebook, intending to post an apology, but when she opened the compose section, she froze. What could she possibly say now? "I'm sorry for hurting everyone. I didn't mean to discriminate. I didn't realize the situation would get so out of hand." Anything she said now would be torn apart, ridiculed, scrutinized word by word. She had seen scandals like this before. She had once scoffed when she saw someone destroyed on the internet for a stupid comment or action. And now, she was the one being hunted. The taxi drove through the crowded streets of Washington, D.C., the streetlights flashing past the window, casting a pale light over Karen's ghostly face. She closed her eyes, trying to come up with a solution, some way to stop this storm before it completely drowned her. She could hire a lawyer, perhaps enlist a crisis management firm, maybe disappear for a while and wait for things to calm down. But she knew the world didn't work that way anymore. The public outrage wouldn't fade overnight. As the numbers on the screen continued to climb every minute, as more and more articles updated, as thousands of people kept sharing, commenting, mocking, Karen realized a painful truth more devastating than anything else. There was no turning back. There was no way to erase what had happened. No way to control this story. No way to make people forget her name. Everything she had built had crumbled, and she could do nothing to salvage it. Karen opened her eyes, staring at the city passing by outside the window. For the first time in her life, she felt completely powerless. A notification bell rang. Karen jumped, her eyes dark from stress, quickly scanning her phone screen. She hoped it was a message from someone on her side, a word of encouragement from an old friend, or at least a glimmer of hope that could help her turn things around. But when the words appeared on the screen, a chill ran down her spine. From the bank. Your account has been frozen during the investigation into your organization's ethical violations. Karen felt as if someone had just squeezed the air out of her lungs. She couldn't breathe, her fingers clenched tightly around the phone as if, by holding on hard enough, she could turn back time, stop this nightmare from continuing to swallow her. But she knew. She had lost everything. Nothing left. No job, no reputation, no friends. And worst of all, everyone saw her as a racist. The taxi sped along the streets of Washington, D.C., the neon lights passing by the window, reflecting off Karen's pale face. But she no longer registered the world outside. All that filled her mind were a series of fragmented images, broken moments from her life. Pieces of the past now meaningless in the face of the harsh reality she had to confront. She had once been a powerful woman, respected in the elite circles, invited to major events, appearing in newspapers as a leader of a prestigious charity organization. She had once thought she was invincible, that no matter what happened, she would always have her status, her power, her voice. But now everything had been taken away in less than a day. She lost her job when the charity organization fired her without hesitation. She lost her friends when everyone she had trusted turned their backs on her. No one wanted to be associated with her anymore. She lost her reputation when her name became tied to one of the most shameful scandals of the year. And now she had lost her money. Not just her job, but her entire bank account had been frozen. She couldn't spend, couldn't withdraw, could do nothing but sit there and watch everything slip through her fingers, with no one willing to help. She had never felt so small and hopeless. The phone vibrated again in her hand, but this time Karen didn't want to open it. She knew what the next message would bring: more criticism, more consequences, more things she couldn't control, but she couldn't escape. With trembling hands, she opened her messages. An email from her lawyer had just arrived, with the cold subject line: Karen, we need to talk immediately. The email was short, but enough to make her feel like the world around her was collapsing. We've reviewed the situation, and it's highly likely you will face a lawsuit related to discriminatory behavior in a public setting. I advise you to prepare yourself. Karen gasped, feeling as though all her energy had been drained. She could be sued. She knew this was serious, but never imagined it would go this far. She hadn't just lost her job, been shamed on social media, and exposed by the press. Now she could be dragged into a lawsuit that she had no chance of winning, because all the evidence was against her. The video was too clear. There was no denying it, no way to justify it. She had ruined her own life, and there was no turning back. Karen leaned back in the taxi seat, staring blankly at the ceiling of the car, her mind empty. She no longer felt fear, because the fear had completely consumed her, had become a part of her, draining all other emotions and leaving her with a terrifying emptiness. She had once believed she had power, thought she could control everything, thought nothing could harm her status. But it turned out, with just one foolish moment, one loss of control, one action caught on camera and posted online, everything had changed. She was no longer the powerful woman she once was. She was just a name spoken of with contempt, a prime example of the collapse of privilege and arrogance. And worst of all, this wasn't over. The storm hadn't passed. It had only just begun. The 13-year-old boy walked through the airport gate, quietly blending in with the crowd moving along, his face calm as if nothing had ever happened. The bright lights in the arrival hall reflected off his white hoodie, his clean sneakers tapping softly on the glossy stone floor. No one looked at him in any special way, no crowds of reporters waiting, no shouts calling his name. He was just another passenger leaving the airport after a long flight. And for him, this was just another ordinary day, a day like any other, where he once again witnessed someone like Karen self-destruct. He didn't need to do anything. No need to shout, no need to resist, no need to prove anything. He was simply there, present, existing, and his mere presence had turned Karen's world upside down. He didn't need to win, because from the beginning he had never lost. But Karen was different. On the other side of the airport, hidden behind a line of taxis leaving one by one, Karen sat slumped in the back seat of an old taxi, her trembling hands cradling her face. She couldn't control her breath, each inhale heavy as if a stone was pressing on her chest. Everything had gone farther than she had imagined. She had lost everything, but it wasn't over yet. Her phone vibrated again. Her eyes scanned the screen, but this time she didn't dare open the messages. The names appearing in her list were no longer friends or colleagues. They were strangers. People digging into her past, tracing every trace she had left online over the years, trying to destroy whatever was left of her life. There were threatening comments. There were emails from lawyers warning that a lawsuit could be filed at any moment. There were messages from old colleagues, not to encourage her, but to sever all ties completely. She had nowhere to go, no one to ask for help. She had once thought money could help her escape, but her bank accounts had been frozen. She had once thought her reputation could protect her, but now it was the very thing destroying her. She had once thought her job would be a safety net, but she had been fired. There was nothing left, nothing to cling to, and worst of all, she couldn't do anything to change it, because no one cared about what she thought anymore. People only cared about what they had seen. They had seen the video. They had seen her face when she tried to use her power to push a child out of a seat that he absolutely deserved. They had seen how she tried to spin the situation, how she pretended to be the victim, how she failed miserably in front of hundreds of people. No one remembered who she had been before. No one remembered her 8 years of charity work. No one remembered the contributions she had once been proud of. They only remembered this moment. The moment Karen became the quintessential example of arrogance. Exposed, of discrimination laid bare, of privilege utterly worthless in the face of reality. The taxi stopped in front of a small hotel tucked behind a quiet street, where Karen hoped she could hide from the world for a few days. She stepped out of the car, pulled her hood up to cover her face, and walked quietly through the door to the reception. But as she pulled out her credit card, the young hotel clerk glanced at the computer screen, then looked up at her with a slightly uncomfortable expression. "Sorry, but we can't serve you." Karen froze. What? Why not? The clerk pressed his lips together, then tilted his head toward the screen where an email from management had just come through. "We don't want to get involved in the online controversy." His tone wasn't malicious, but Karen knew it was worse than a harsh insult, because it meant they were afraid of her. Not because she had power, not because she could harm them, but because simply having her here could pull the hotel into the media storm surrounding her. She wasn't just destroyed, she had become a name no one wanted to be associated with. She hadn't just lost everything, she had become a social pariah. And as she quietly left the hotel, aimlessly walking down the brightly lit street, she realized a bitter truth she never thought she would have to face. No one can escape the consequences of their actions, no matter who you are, no matter how wealthy or powerful you may be, no matter how many years you live with privilege, believing you can control everything. In the end, the truth will catch up with you, and the world will never let you forget your mistake. Karen stood still in the street, watching the crowds pass by, each person busy with their own lives, no one paying attention to her. No one cared anymore who she was or what she had once been. She was just a ghost of herself, lost in a world she no longer belonged to. So Karen had destroyed her life for a moment of arrogance and discrimination. She had once thought power, status, and privilege could help her control everything, but in the end, her own actions had become the hammer that struck down her reputation and career. No one stood by her. There was no way to escape. And most of all, the world would never let her forget this lesson. Karen's story is a clear reminder that every action has consequences, and in the age of digital technology, the truth cannot be hidden. The question remains, do you think Karen can return to a normal life after everything that has happened? If you were her, what would you do to salvage the situation? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story thought-provoking, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more shocking, real-life stories like this one. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.